So today I thought I'd stop by the park and drill you with a bunch of questions. It's a pop quiz, pay attention, there'll be a test at the end. This is a quiz kind of not meant as a full-on diagnostic tool. So I don't want you to try and diagnose yourself or someone else with these questions. But if they sound familiar to you, more than just a couple of them, you should think about talking to a psychiatrist or a therapist or a medical doctor of some sort, because this disorder is pretty common, but people don't know they have it. And if you have it, or if your loved one has it, you don't have to live like that. There's ways to work with this. So pay attention. Here's your quiz. Okay, ready, set? I find that I often do one or more of the following: drive recklessly, which includes speeding, engage in unsafe sex, abuse alcohol or drugs, binge eat, binge drink, gamble, or spend money recklessly. Like, you just go on wild sprees because you feel like it. You feel lonely or you feel depressed or something. So you can agree, strongly agree, disagree, just kind of like, not sure. How about this one? Sometimes when I'm stressed, especially if someone has abandoned me, I get very paranoid. I feel myself spacing out or dissociate. They don't have to actually abandon you. They can just not do things the way that you think that they should do it. Like, let's say you want to spend the holidays together with somebody and they're previously occupied. So you get really annoyed and you feel rejected and you feel offended that how dare they not spend time with you, because you have this ideal of this perfect relationship and it's not going the way you want. How about this one? Oh, and the paranoid thing also. I can get very paranoid, feeling myself space out or dissociate. The paranoid part can also be like, I know that person's talking about me, or I know they did that on purpose. And, just thinking, I bet you that he or she, that person, is talking to somebody else on their text or their email or their phone or whatever. So that's also being paranoid. And the dissociate part, we all kind of do that sometimes. So, but this is more of a little heavier duty common thing. But dissociate just basically means something similar to like daydreaming, like where you're out of yourself. You don't, like, if you're really engrossed in a book or a movie or something, and somebody walks in, you don't even hear it because you're not even aware. So sometimes it's like the deja vu kind of thing. And there's different aspects of it, but this is not just like being so engrossed in a book that you don't hear somebody come in. So another one says, I often idealize others, especially when I first meet them, and feel comfortable in sharing the most intimate details with them. But I often feel that these same people don't care enough or aren't there enough for me. So like the oversharers of the world, the ones that have the porous boundaries. We did a video on boundaries before, and these are the ones that would kind of have a more porous boundary in relationships. Not necessarily everywhere in their life, but in relationships, they would have this, like, oh, I got to tell you everything about me. First date, you get the whole life history of all the dates, all the breakups, all the whatevers that you've had. And sometimes you feel like the same people that you're sharing all this with, they're not reciprocating in the way that you want them to. They're not telling you all their deep, dark secrets that you just told them, and you feel rejected and offended. And it's like, well, like they're not on your side. They're not there for you. So how about I sometimes get very angry, extremely sarcastic and bitter, and feel like I have a hard time controlling this anger. And it comes on like that, out of the blue. One little snub, let's say you get snubbed, and you stalk away, and you pout, and you don't even apologize or anything, and then a few hours later, or a few days later, you're fine, just like nothing ever happened. And that's it. This particular sarcastic and bitter and anger thing, it's a hours to days kind of thing, not weeks on end or months on end like another disorder, a couple other disorders. So this is kind of specific to just a brief period. So let's say somebody, you want to have, going back to the holidays thing, so you want to spend the holidays with somebody and they're otherwise occupied. Not only do you feel abandoned, but you show it by being angry You feel like nobody cares, and so you get mad and you start throwing things or whatever, however you express your anger. Speaking of which, side note, when we did the abuse video, going back to like in this anger thing, if you start punching the walls or throwing stuff around or getting physical, you don't have to get physical at someone, but it can still be considered physical abuse. Let's keep that in mind. How about this one? I've engaged in self-mutilating, self-harm, or suicidal behaviors, gestures, or threats. That does not necessarily mean that you've always intentionally attempted suicide, but you can intentionally engage in things that can lead to self-harm. Going back to the reckless behavior, speeding, or binge drinking, or doing drugs or whatever. Those kind of things, if you take this and that and put them together, like the binge drinking or the speeding or whatever, it can be so you're doing this behavior and you don't care if you die. That can be this. That can be self-harms, gestures or threats. So I'm going to drive my car into a wall kind of thing. So keep that in mind. How about this one? I often experience a sudden shift in the way I look at myself and my life and completely change my goals, values, and career focus. So the sudden shift part, it's like you're going, let's say you want to go to school to be a therapist. So you're going to school, a couple semesters into it, and I'm going to be a therapist, yada, yada. And then a few semesters into it, you go, no, I found my calling. I'm going to be a welder. And so you quit that and you go to be a welder because that's your calling and you just know it. So now you're off to be a welder. You go through that for a while. And then it's like, no, I found my other calling. I'm going to be a grocery clerk. That's my calling. All this back and forth thing, and you just can't quite figure out what you're doing. And the goals and the values and that kind of thing, a lot of times the other person in a relationship, the other person's goals or values become yours because you really don't have any sense of self or any kind of sense of your own values and your own goals because that sounds good. I like your values. I like your goals. That's what I want to do too. Me too. Sign me up. And then when that relationship is over, you got somebody else with different values and different goals. Me too. That's mine too. Okay. So, how about this one? I'm often afraid that others will abandon me or leave me. So I'll make frantic efforts to avoid this abandonment even when it's not real. Sometimes people don't know it's coming and people just leave, or sometimes they think they did something that's going to make the other person leave. And a lot of times there's this I should show it to you sometime. It's the anger iceberg, and it shows this little the ocean. It has this little iceberg on the top and it just says anger, but underneath the iceberg, because most of the iceberg is under the water, not on the top, as the Titanic found out. Underneath the iceberg is all of the other, not all, but the other emotions that anger hides. Because a lot of times when we feel embarrassed or we feel shame or we feel fear or we feel, frustrated or lonely or sad or whatever, those emotions kind of get hidden and come out as anger. So underneath that anger is a whole bunch of other emotions that you might be experiencing but not know it. You might not recognize it and be able to pinpoint what those emotions are. Keep that in mind. And another one says, my mood can shift between extreme periods of anxiety, depression, or irritability in just a few hours or days. And it goes back to what I just said a minute ago. Because this is very specific to this disorder as being just a few hours or days instead of weeks and months. Like this other disorder this one is frequently misdiagnosed as that one a lot. And so people who get misdiagnosed with that disorder are put on medication that doesn't do anything because there's no medication for this specifically. There is medication for anxiety and depression that can help with that, but as far as this particular disorder, there's no medication for it. So, how about this one? My views of others, especially those I care about, can shift dramatically and without warning. So that one is like, everybody's all, it's all good or all bad. There's no gray area. So when you first meet somebody or whatever, that you idealize them and it's just perfect. There's not a single thing wrong with this person. I got to have them or whatever. And then they do something to make you feel rejected or offended or like they're going to leave or whatever. And then all of a sudden they're the devil themselves. They're just horrible people. You don't want to be around them. And then a few days later, they're back to being all good, and all this stuff doesn't even exist anymore. They're all good again. The gray area is kind of missing. Now, some people with this disorder, all disorders are on a spectrum anyway. You can have extremely serious down to a mild kind of, presentation of this. So the shift dramatically and without any warning kind of thing, it can be, as far as the all good and all bad, there can be some gray area for some people, but for the most part, it's black and white. And so, how about this one? I would say most of my romantic relationships have been very intense, but not very stable. Like you always got this fear that they're going to leave, or they're going to do something, or it's rocky relationships, and people will say, and that doesn't have to be necessarily just romantic relationships. It can be work relationships and friendships and all that kind of stuff. You go through friends like you go through socks, or partners. It's like, I got another partner this week, who's the boyfriend of the month? That kind of thing. So, oops, hello. And then I'm currently experiencing enough problems in this area of my life that is negatively impacting my ability to go to school or work or be with friends or family or have a romantic relationship. So that one is, like I just said, sometimes you just feel like everybody's talking about you, you get a little paranoid, or they're going to leave you, and you just feel abandoned and all that kind of stuff. Now, what I call the linchpin in this particular disorder seems to be pretty consistent through most of the people who are diagnosed with this particular disorder. Now, let me say that you can feel this particular symptom that I'm going to tell you in a minute. You can feel it in other disorders, but the rest of the stuff doesn't necessarily apply to other disorders. So as a combination, this is kind of the kicker. And it says, I nearly always feel empty. So if you've ever thought, or if you've ever said, or if you've ever felt chronically empty, more often than not, and if anything else in this list sounded familiar, like the intense relationships or fear of somebody leaving you or trouble keeping, friends or whatever, or, the reckless behavior, you might want to consider talking to a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a medical doctor, because in case you hadn't figured out, this particular disorder is borderline personality disorder. I don't like the title. Most people don't like the title because it's like borderline. The border of what? And it's got personality in the title, and so it sounds really, personal. You kind of get offended by the title. But at the same time, a lot of people who have this disorder, if they recognize all of these symptoms, and they are glad to know that there's a name for what they have, because it can be helped. There's a strong genetic component to this disorder, but it also has a lot to do with nature, nurture, environmental stuff, and choices and consequences and responsibility and accountability, because regardless of anybody's disorders or whatever, they're still responsible for their behavior, and they should be accountable for that. So the other disorder that this is frequently misdiagnosed as is bipolar disorder. If you've ever been told that you have bipolar disorder and you take medication and it doesn't do anything, or maybe you don't take the medication at all, but somebody's told you, you got bipolar, and it doesn't quite fit, it might be this. So you might want to go and get that checked again and have somebody do a better assessment, because it might be borderline personality disorder. And again, if it sounds familiar, there's a list of things. Well, as part of it being a therapist, it's called the DSM. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and we're on version 5. So that's like the therapist Bible thing, and it's got all the, the codes and the disorders and stuff in it. But in order to be diagnosed with this disorder, or any disorder actually, is you have to hit a certain number of things on the list in that manual to qualify as for a diagnosis. And it can be mild, moderate, and severe. So again, going back to if it sounds familiar to you, especially the empty part and the relationship troubles, turbulent relationships, talk to somebody, because you don't have to live like that. You can get some help. Going back to the therapy video that I did a little while ago, therapy is not a scary thing. It can seem like it. It can seem, embarrassing or humiliating or whatever, but it's not. It's like school, learning coping skills and relational skills, especially relational skills in this particular disorder, because that seems to be where you see it the most, is in the relationships. So there's a whole long history of this particular disorder and how it came to be and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into that. If you want to learn more about it, do some research on reputable websites like Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and the National Mental Health website, that kind of thing. You can find information on this disorder. But don't use that to diagnose yourself, because it's not a helpful thing to do it that way. And importantly, don't use it to diagnose somebody else. Like we all go around diagnosing this person and that person as a narcissist, which will be another video. The borderline personality disorder, again, you don't have to live like that. You don't have to have all these relationships that go south. You just have to put in the work with therapy to work through it and get better at it. It's a trial and error thing. And a lot of people with borderline personality disorder, when they finally do go into therapy, they'll quit when it starts to get tough. Don't start therapy and then be a quitter. If you really, really want to stop living like this and start living a healthier, happier life, go to therapy and stick with it. And get a therapist that knows specifically about borderline personality disorder. Not every therapist does, because there's certain things, certain modalities that they can use that are more effective. Just something to think about. So there you go. That is the nutshell version of borderline personality disorder. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'll put some links in the description underneath there for, borderline personality disorder. And then if it sounds familiar, talk to your doctor, talk to a therapist. This is not a diagnostic tool. It's just information only. So there you go. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check back in a few days. I'm sure there'll be another video that'll pop up for you. And there you go. So I'll talk to you later. Thanks.